The world seemed to shimmer a little at the edges. Whatever would I have done with your old parents? If they have left you, Coraline, it must be because they became bored of you or tired. Now I will never become bored with you, and I will never abandon you. You will always be safe with me. The other mother's wet-looking black hair drifted around her head like the tentacles of a creature in the deep ocean. They weren't bored of me, said Coraline. You're lying. You stole them. Silly, silly Coraline. They are fine wherever they are. Coraline simply glared at the other mother. I'll prove it, said the other mother, and brushed the surface of the mirror with her long white fingers. It clouded over as if a dragon had breathed on it. And then it cleared. In the mirror, it was daytime already. Coraline was looking at the hallway, all the way down to the front door. The door opened from the outside, and Coraline's mother and father, walked inside. They carried suitcases. That was a fine holiday, said Coraline's father. How nice it is not to have Coraline anymore, said her mother with a happy smile. Now we can do all the things we always wanted to do, like go abroad, but we're prevented from doing by having a little daughter. And, said her father, I take great comfort in knowing that her other mother will take better care of her than we ever could. The mirror fogged and faded, and reflected the night once more. See? said her other mother. No! said Coraline. I don't see, and I don't believe it either. She hoped that what she had just seen was not real, but she was not as certain as she sounded. There was a tiny doubt inside her, like a maggot in an apple core. Then she looked up and she saw the expression on her other mother's face, a flash of real anger which crossed her face like summer lightning, and Coraline was sure in her heart that what she had seen in the mirror was no more than an illusion. Coraline sat down on the sofa and ate her apple. Please, said her other mother, don't be difficult. She walked into the drawing room and clapped her hands twice. There was a rustling noise. A black rat appeared. It stared up at her. Bring me the key, she said. The rat chittered. Then it ran through the open door that led back to Coraline's own flat. The rat returned, dragging the key behind it. Why don't you have your own keys on this side? Asked Coraline. There is only one key, only one door. There is only one key, only one door, said the other father. Hush, said the other mother. You must not bother our darling Coraline's head with such trivialities. She put the key in the keyhole and twisted. The lock was stiff, but it clunked closed. She dropped the key into her apron pocket. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten to a luminous gray. If we aren't going to have a midnight snack, said the other mother, we still need our beauty sleep. I am going back to bed, Coraline. I would strongly suggest that you do the same. She placed her long white fingers on the shoulder of the other father, and she walked him out of the room. Coraline walked over to the door at the far corner of the drawing room. She tugged on it, but it was tightly locked. The door of her other parents' bedroom was now closed. She was indeed tired,
but she did not want to sleep in the bedroom. She did not want to sleep under the same roof as her other mother. The front door was not locked. Coraline walked out into the dawn and down the stone stairs. She sat down on the bottom step. It was cold. Something furry pushed itself against her side. In one smooth, insaunting motion, Coraline jumped. Then, breathing a sigh of relief, she saw what it was. "Oh, it's you," she said to the black cat. "See," said the cat. "It wasn't so hard recognizing me, was it? Even without names."
"Well, what if I wanted to call you?"
The cat wrinkled its nose and managed to look impressed. "Calling cats," it confided, "tends to be rather overrated activity. Might as well call a whirlwind."
"What if it was dinner time?" asked Coraline. "Wouldn't you want to be called then?"
"Of course," said the cat, "but a simple cry of 'dinner' would do nicely. See? No need for names."
"Why does she want me?" Coraline asked the cat. "Why does she want me to stay here with her?"
"She wants something to love, I think," said the cat. "Something that isn't her. She might want something to eat as well. It's hard to tell with creatures like that."
"Do you have any advice?"
asked Coraline. The cat looked as if it were about to say something else, sarcastic. Then it flicked its whiskers and said, "Challenge her. There's no guarantee she'll play fair, but her kind of thing loves games and challenges."
"What kind of thing is that?" asked Coraline.
But the cat made no answer, simply stretched luxuriatingly, I think. Ooh. And walked away. Then it stopped and turned and said, "I'd go inside if I were you. Get some sleep. You have a long day ahead of you." And then the cat was gone. Still, Coraline realized it had a point. She crept back into the silent house, past the closed bedroom door, inside which the other mother and the other father, what, she wondered, slept, waited. And then it came to her that she should open the bedroom door. She would find it empty, or more precisely, that it was an empty room, and it would remain empty until the exact moment that she opened the door. Somehow that made it easier. Coraline walked into the green and pink parody of her own room. She closed the door and halted the toy box in front of it. It would not keep anyone out, but the noise somebody would make trying to dislodge it would wake her, she hoped. The toys in the toy box were still mostly asleep, and they stirred and muttered as she moved their box. And then they went back to sleep. Coraline checked under her bed, looking for rats, but there was nothing there. She took off her dressing gown and slippers and climbed into bed and fell asleep with barely enough time to reflect, as she did so, on what the cat could have meant by a challenge. Chapter 6. Coraline was woken by a mid-morning sun full on her face. For a moment she felt utterly dislocated. She did not know where she was. She was not entirely sure who she was. It is astonishing just how much of what we are can be tied to the beds we wake up in the morning, and it is astonishing how fragile that can be. Sometimes Coraline, who would forget who she was while she was daydreaming, that she was exploring the Arctic or the Amazon rainforest or darkest Africa. And it was not until someone tapped her on the shoulder or said her name that Coraline would come back from millions of miles away. With a start, and all in a fraction of a second, wave to remember who she was and what her name was, and that she was even there at all. Now there was sun on her face, and she was Coraline Jones. Yes. And then the green and pinkness of the room she was in, and rustling of a large painted paper butterfly as it fluttered and beat its way about the ceiling, told her where she had woken up. She climbed out of bed. She could not wear her pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers during the day. She decided even if it meant wearing the other Coraline's clothes. Was there an other Coraline? No, she realized. There wasn't. There was just her. There were no regular clothes in the cupboard, though. They were more like dress-up clothes. Or, she thought, the kind of clothes she would love to have hanging in her wardrobe at home. There was a Raggedy Witch costume, a patchwork scarecrow costume, a future warrior costume with little digital lights in it that glittered and blinked, a silky evening dress all covered with feathers and mirrors. Finally, in a drawer, she found a pair of black jeans that seemed to be made of velvet night, and a gray sweater which was the color of thick smoke, with faint and tiny stars on the fabric which twinkled. She pulled on the jeans and the sweater. Then she put on a pair of bright orange boots she found at the bottom of the cupboard. She took her last apple out of her pocket of her dressing gown, and then took from the same pocket the stone with the hole in it. She put the stone into the pocket of her jeans, and it was as if her head had cleared a little, as if she had come out of a sort of fog. She went into the kitchen, but it was deserted. Still, she was sure that there was someone in the flat. She walked down the hall until she reached her father's study and discovered that it was occupied. "Where's the other mother?" she asked the other father. He was sitting in the study and at a desk which looked just like her father's, but he was not doing anything at all, not even reading gardening catalogs as her own father did, when he was only pretending to be working. "Out," he told her. "Fixing the doors. There are some vermin problems." He seemed pleased to have somebody to talk to. "The rats, you mean?" "No, the rats are our friends. This is the other kind. Big black fellow, and his tail high." "The cat, you mean?" "That's the one," said the other father. He looked less like her true father today. There was something slightly vague about his face, like bread dough that had begun to rise smooth out the bumps and smoothing out the bumps and cracks and depressions. "Really, I mustn't talk to you when she's not here," he said. "Don't you worry, she won't be gone often. I shall demonstrate our tender hospitality to you such that you will not even think about ever going back." He closed his mouth and folded his hands in his lap. "So what am I to do now?" asked Coraline. The father pointed to his lips. Silence. "If you won't even talk to me," said Coraline, "I am going exploring." "No point," said the other father. "There isn't anywhere but here." This is all she made. The house, the grounds, the people in the house. She made it and waited. Then he looked embarrassed and put one finger to his lips again, as if he had just said too much. Coraline walked out of his study. She went into the drawing room, over to the old door, and she pulled it, rattled, and shook it. No, it was locked fast, and the other mother had the key. She looked around the room. It was so familiar. That was what made it feel so truly strange. Everything was exactly the same as she remembered. There was all her grandmother's strange smelling furniture. There was the painting of the bowl of fruit, a bunch of grapes, 2 plums, a peach, and an apple hanging on the wall. There was the low wooden table with the lion's feet, and the empty fireplace, which seemed to suck heat from the room. But there was something else, something she did not remember seeing before. A ball of glass up on the mantelpiece. She went over to the fireplace, went up on tiptoes, and lifted it down. It was a snow globe with 2 little people in it. Coraline shook it and sent the snow flying. White snow that glittered as it tumbled through the water. Then she put the snow globe back on the mantelpiece and carried it on, looking for her true parents and for a way out. She went out of the flat, passing the flashing lights door, behind which the other Mrs. Spink and Forcible performed their show forever, and she set off into the woods where Coraline came from. Once you were through the patch of trees, you saw nothing but the meadow and the old tennis court. In this place, the woods went on farther. The trees became cruder and less tree-like the farther you went. Pretty soon they seemed very approximate, like the idea of trees, a grayish-brown trunk below, a greenish splotch of something that might have thin leaves above. Coraline wondered if the other mother wasn't interested in trees, or if she hadn't bothered with this bit properly because nobody was expected to come out this far. She kept walking. And then the mist began. It was not damp, like a normal fog or mist. It was not cold, and it was not warm. It felt to Coraline like she was walking into nothing. "I'm an explorer," thought Coraline to herself, "and I need all the ways out of here that I can get. So I'll keep walking." The world she was walking through was a pale nothingness, like a blank sheet of paper or an enormous empty white room. It had no temperature, no smell, no texture, no taste. And no taste. "It certainly isn't mist," thought Coraline, although she did not know what it was. For a moment she wondered if she might not have gone blind. But no, she could see herself plain as day. But there was no ground beneath her feet, just a misty, milky whiteness. "And what do you think you're doing?" said a shape to one side of her. It took a few moments for her eyes to focus on it properly. She thought it might be some kind of lion at first, from a distance away from her, and then she thought it might be a mouse, close beside her, and then she knew what it was. "I'm exploring," Coraline told the cat. Its fur stood straight out from its body, and its eyes were wide, while its tail was down and between its legs. It did not look a happy cat. "Bad place," said the cat. "If you want to call it a place, excuse me, which I don't know. What are you doing here?" "I'm exploring." "Nothing here to find," said the cat. "This is just the outside, the part of the place she hasn't bothered to create." "She? The one who says she's your other mother," said the cat. "What is she?" The cat did not answer, just padded through the pale mist beside Coraline. A shape had begun to appear in front of them, something high and towering in the dark. "You were wrong." "You were wrong," she told the cat. "There is something there." And then it took shape in the mist, a dark house which loomed at them out with the formless whiteness. "But that's," said Coraline. "The house you just left," agreed the cat. "Precisely." "Maybe I just got turned around in the mist," said Coraline. The cat curled the high tip of its tail into a question mark and tipped its head to one side. "You might have done," it said. "I certainly would not. Wrong indeed." "But how can you walk away from something and still come back to it?" "Easy," said the cat. "Think of somebody walking around the world. You start out walking away from something and end up coming back to it." "Small world?" said Coraline. "It's big enough for her," said the cat. "Spiders' webs only have to be large enough to catch flies." Coraline shivered. "He said that she's fixing all the gates and the..." "He said that she's fixing all the gates and doors," she told the cat. "To keep you out." "To keep you out?" "She may try," said the cat, unimpressed. "Oh, yes, she may try." They were standing under a clump of trees now, beside the house. These trees looked much more likely. There's a way in and ways. There are ways in and ways out of places like this that even she doesn't know about. "Did she make this place then?" asked Coraline. "Made it, found it. What's the difference?" asked the cat. Either way, she's had it for a very long time. Hang on." And it gave a shiver and a leap before Coraline could blink. The cat was sitting with its paw holding down a big black rat. "It's not that I like It's not that I like rats at the best of times, said the cat conversationally, as if nothing had happened. But the rats in this place are all spies for her. She uses them as her eyes and hands. And with that, the cat let the rat go. It ran several feet, and then the cat, with one bound, was upon it, batting it hard with one sharp clawed paw, while with the other paw it held the rat down. I love this bit, said the cat happily. Want to see me do it again? No, said Coraline. Why do you do it? You're torturing it. Said the cat. It let the rat go. The rat stumbled, dazed, for a few steps. Then it began to run. With a blow of its paw, the cat knocked the rat into the air and caught it in its mouth. Stop it, said Coraline. The cat dropped the rat between its two front paws. There are those, it said, with a sigh in tones as smooth as oiled silk, who have suggested that the tendency of a cat to play with its prey is a merciful one. After all, it permits the occasional funny little running snack to escape from time to time. How often does your dinner get to escape? Then it picked the rat up in its mouth and carried it off to the woods behind a tree. Coraline walked back into the house. All was quiet and empty and deserted. Even her footsteps on the carpeted floor seemed loud. Dust motes hung in the beams of sunlight. At the far end of the hall was the mirror. She could see herself walking toward the mirror, looking reflected, a little braver than she actually felt. There was nothing else there in the mirror, just her in the corridor. A hand touched her shoulder and she looked up. The other mother stared down at Coraline with big black button eyes. Coraline, my darling, she said, I thought we could play some games together this morning. Now you're back from your walk. Hopscotch? Happy families? Monopoly? You weren't in the mirror, said Coraline. The other mother smiled. Mirrors, she said, are never to be trusted. Now, what game shall we play? Coraline shook her head. I don't want to play a game with you, she said. I want to go home and be with my real parents. I want you to let them go. To let us all go. The other mother shook her head very slowly. Sharper than a serpent's tooth, she said, is a daughter's ingratitude still. The proudest spirit can be broken with love. And her long white fingers wangled and caressed the air. I have no plans to love you, said Coraline. No matter what, you can't make me love you. Let's talk about it, said the other mother, and she turned and walked into the lounge. Coraline followed her. The other mother sat down on the big sofa. She picked up a shopping bag from beside the sofa and took out a white rustling paper bag from inside. She extended the hand with it to Coraline. Would you like one? She asked politely, expecting it to be a toffee or a butterscotch ball. Coraline looked down. The bag was full with large, shiny black beetles crawling over each other with their efforts to get out of the bag. "No!" said Coraline. "I don't want one." "Suit yourself," said her other mother. She carefully picked out a particularly large black beetle, pulled off its legs, which she dropped neatly into a big glass ashtray on the small table beside the sofa, and popped the beetle into her mouth. And it crunched, and she crunched it happily. "Yum," she said, and took another. "You're sick," said Coraline. "Sick, evil, and weird." "Is that any way to talk to your mother?" her other mother asked, with her mouth full of black beetles. "You aren't my mother," said Coraline. Her other mother ignored this. "Now I think you are a little overexcited, Coraline. Perhaps this afternoon we could do a little embroidery together, or some watercolor painting. Then dinner. And then, if you have been good, you may play with the rats a little before bed. And I shall read you a story and tuck you in and kiss you good night." Her long white fingers fluttered gently, like a tired butterfly, and Coraline shivered. "No!" said Coraline. The other mother sat on the sofa. Her mouth was set in a line. Her lips were pursed. She popped another black beetle into her mouth, and then another, like someone with a bag of chocolate-covered raisins. Her big black button eyes stared into Coraline's hazel eyes. Her shiny black hair twined and twisted about her neck and shoulders as if it were blowing in some wind that Coraline could not touch or feel. They stared at each other for over a minute. Then the other mother said, "Manners!" She folded the white paper bag so no black beetles could escape, and she placed it back in the shopping bag. Then she stood up, and up, and up. She seemed taller than Coraline remembered. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out first the black door key, which she frowned at, and tossed it into the shopping bag, then a tiny silver-colored key. She held it up triumphantly. "There we are," she said. "This is for you, Coraline, for your own good, because I love you, to teach you manners. Manners maketh man, after all." She pulled Coraline back into the hallway and advanced upon the mirror at the end of the hall. Then she pushed the tiny key into the fabric of the mirror, and she twisted it to open like a door, revealing a dark space behind it. "You may come out when you've learned some manners," said the other mother, "and when you're ready to be a loving daughter." She picked up Coraline and pushed her into the dim space behind the mirror, a fragment of a beetle sticking to her lower lip, and there was no expression at all in her black button eyes. Then she swung the mirror door closed and left Coraline in the darkness. Chapter 7. Somewhere inside her, Coraline could feel a huge sob welling up, and then she stopped it before it came out. She took a deep breath and let it go. She put out her hands to touch the space in which she was imprisoned. It was the size of a broom closet, tall enough to stand in or to sit in, not wide or deep enough to lie down in. One wall was glass, and it felt cold to the touch. She went around the tiny room a second time, running her hands over every surface that she could reach, feeling for doorknobs or switches or concealed catches, some kind of way out, and found nothing. A spider scuttled over the back of her hand, and she choked back a shriek. But apart from the spider, she was alone in the closet in the pitch dark. And then her hand touched something that felt for all the world like somebody's cheek and lips, small and cold, and a voice whispered in her ear, "Hush!" and "Shush! Say nothing." And for the beldam might be listening. Coraline said nothing. She felt a cold hand touch her face, fingers running over it like a gentle beat of a moth's wings. Another voice, hesitant, and so faint Coraline wondered if she were imagining it, and said, Art thou alive?" "Yes," whispered Coraline. "Poor child," said the first voice. "Who are you?" whispered Coraline. "Names, names, names," said another voice, all far away and lost. "The names are first things to go, after the breath has gone, and the beating of the heart. We keep our memories longer than our names. I still keep pictures in my mind of my governess on some May morning, carrying my hoop and stick, and the morning sun behind her, and all the tulips bobbing in the breeze. But I have forgotten the name of my governess, and of the tulips too. I don't think tulips have names," said Coraline. "They're just tulips." "Perhaps," said the voice sadly, "but I have always thought that these tulips must have had names. They were red and orange and red and red and orange and yellow, like the embers of a nursery fire of a winter's evening. I remember them." The voice sounded so sad that Coraline put out a hand to place where the voice was coming from, and she found a cold hand and squeezed it tight. Her eyes were beginning to get used to the darkness. Now Coraline saw, or imagined she saw, 3 shapes, each as faint and as pale as the moon in the daytime sky. They were the shapes of children about her own size. The cold hand squeezed her hand back. "Thank you," said the voice. "Are you a girl?" asked Coraline. "Or a boy?" There was a pause. "When I was small, I wore skirts, and my hair was long and curled," it said doubtfully. "But now that you ask, it does seem to me that one day they took my skirts and gave me breeches and cut my hair." "'Tain't something we give a mind to," said the first of. "'Tain't something we gave mind to," said the first of the voices. "A boy, perhaps, then," continued the one whose hand she was holding. "I believe I was once a boy." And it glowed a little more brightly in the darkness of the room behind the mirror. "What happened to you all?" asked Coraline. "How did you come here?" "She left us here," said one of the voices. "She stole our hearts, and she stole our souls,
and she took away our lives. And she left us here and forgot about us in the dark.
Poor things, said Coraline. How long have you been here?
So very long time,
said a voice.
Aye, time beyond reckoning,
said another voice.
I walked through a scullery door, said the voice of
the one that thought it might be a boy.
And I found myself back in the parlor, but she was waiting for me. She told me she was my other mama, but I never saw my true mama again. Flee!
Said the very first voices. Another girl. Coraline fancied.
Flee while there's still air in your lungs, and blood in your veins, and warmth in your heart. Flee while you still have your mind and your soul.
I'm not running away, said Coraline. She has my parents. I came to get them back.
Ah, but she'll keep you here while the days turn to dust and the leaves fall, and the years pass one after the next like the ticking of a clock.
No, said Coraline. She won't. There was a silence, then in the room behind the mirror.
Peradventure,
said the voice in the darkness,
if you could win your mama and your papa back from the beldam, you could also win free our souls.
Has she taken them? Asked Coraline, shocked.
Aye, and hidden them. That is why we could not leave here. When we died, she kept us, and she fed on us, until now we've nothing left of ourselves, only snakeskins and spider husks. Find our secret hearts in, mistress.
And what will happen to you if I do? Asked Coraline. The voices said nothing. And what is she going to do to me? She said. The pale figures paused faintly. She could imagine that they were nothing more than after images, like the glow left by a bright light in your eyes after the lights go out.
It doth not hurt,
whispered one faint voice.
She will take your life, and all you are, and all you carest for, and she will leave you with nothing but mist and fog. She'll take your joy, and one day you'll wake, and your heart and your soul will have gone. A husk you'll be, a wisp you'll be, and a thing no more than a dream on waking, or a memory of something forgotten. Hollow,
whispered the third voice.
Hollow, 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 hollow. You must flee,
sighed a voice faintly. I don't think so, said Coraline. I tried running away, and it didn't work. She took my parents. Can you tell me how to get out of this room?
If we knew, then we would tell you.
Poor things, said Coraline to herself. She sat down. She took off her sweater and rolled it up and put it behind her head as a pillow. She won't keep me in the dark forever, said Coraline. She brought me here to play games. Games and challenges, the cat said. I'm not much of a challenge here in the dark. She tried to get comfortable, twisting and bending herself to fit the crammed space behind the mirror. Her stomach rumbled. She ate her last apple, taking the tiniest bites, making it last as long as she could. When she had finished, she was still hungry. Then an idea struck her, and she whispered,
"When she comes to let me out, why don't you three come with me?" "We wish we could," they sighed to her in their barely there voices. "But she has our hearts in her keeping. Now we belong to the dark and to the empty places. The light would shrivel us and burn."
"Oh," said Coraline. She closed her eyes, which made the darkness darker, and she rested her head on the rolled-up sweater, and she went to sleep. And as she fell asleep, she thought she felt a ghost kiss on her cheek tenderly, and a small voice whisper into her ear, a voice so faint it was barely there at all, a gentle wispy nothing of a voice so hushed that Coraline could almost believe she was imagining it.
"Look through the stone," it said to her,
and then she slept. Chapter 8. The other mother looked healthier than before. There was a little blush to her cheeks, and her hair was wriggling like lazy snakes on a warm day. Excuse me. Her black button eyes seemed as if they had been freshly polished. She had pushed through the mirror as if she were walking through nothing more than solid water, and stared down at Coraline. Then she had opened the door with the little silver key. She picked up Coraline just as Coraline's real mother had when Coraline was much younger, cradling the half-asleep child as if she were a baby. The other mother carried Coraline into the kitchen and put her down very gently upon the countertop. Coraline struggled to wake herself up, conscious only for the moment of having been cuddled and loved, and wanting more of it, then realizing where she was and who she was with.
"There, my sweet Coraline," said her other mother. "I came to fetch you out of the cupboard. You needed to be taught a lesson, but we temper our justice with mercy. Here, we love the sinner and we hate the sin. Now, if you will be a good child who loves her mother, be compliant and fair-spoken, you and I shall understand each other perfectly, and we shall love each other perfectly as well."
Coraline scratched the sleep grit from her eyes. "There were other children in there," she said. "Old ones from a long time ago."
"Were there?"
said the other mother. She was bustling between the pans and the fridge, bringing out eggs and cheese, butter, and a slab of sliced pink bacon. "Yes," said Coraline, "there were. I think you're planning to turn me into one of them, a dead shell." The other mother smiled gently. With one hand she cracked the egg into a bowl. With the other she whisked them and swirled them. Then she dropped a pad of butter into the frying pan, where it hissed and frizzled and spun as she sliced thin slices of cheese. She poured the melted butter and cheese into the egg mixture and whisked it some more.
Now I think you're being silly, dear, said the other mother. I love you. I will always love you. Nobody sensible believes in ghosts anyway. That's because they're all such liars. Smell the lovely breakfast I'm making for you.
She poured the yellow mixture into the pan.
Cheese omelet, your favorite.
Coraline's mouth watered. You like games? She said. That's what I've been told. The other mother's black eyes flashed.
Everybody likes games,
was all she said. Yes, said Coraline. She climbed down from the counter and sat at the table. The bacon was sizzling and spitting under the grill. It smelled wonderful. Wouldn't you be happier if you won me fair and square? Asked Coraline.
Possibly,
said the other mother. She had a show of unconcernedness, but her finger twitched and drummed, and she licked her lips with her scarlet tongue.
What exactly are you offering?
Me, said Coraline. She gripped her knees under the table to stop them from shaking. If I lose, I'll stay here with you forever. And I'll let you love me. I'll be a most dutiful daughter. I'll eat your food and play happy family. And I'll let you sew your buttons onto my eyes. The other mother stared at her. Black buttons unblinking.
That sounds very fine, she said. And if you do not lose?
Then you let me go. You let everyone go. My real father and mother. The dead children. Everyone you've trapped here. The other mother took the bacon from under the grill and put it on a plate. Then she slipped the cheese omelet from the pan onto the plate, flipping it as she did so, letting it fold itself into a perfect omelet shape. As she placed the breakfast plate in front of Coraline, along with a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice and a mug of frothy hot chocolate.
Yes, she said, I think I like this game. But what kind of game shall it be? A riddle game? A test of knowledge or of skill?
An exploring game, suggested Coraline. A finding things game.
And what is it you think you should be finding in this hide-and-go-seek game, Coraline Jones?
Coraline hesitated then. My parents, said Coraline, and the souls of the children behind the mirror. The other mother smiled at this triumphantly, and Coraline wondered if she had made the right choice. Still, it was too late to change her mind now.
A deal, said the other mother. Now eat up your breakfast, my sweet. Don't worry. It won't hurt you.
Coraline stared at the breakfast, hating herself for giving in so easily, but she was starving. How do I know you'll keep your word? Asked Coraline.
I swear it, said the other mother. I swear it on my own mother's grave.
Does she have a grave? Asked Coraline.
Oh, yes.
Said the other mother.
I put her in there myself. And when I found her trying to call out, I put her back.
Swear on something else, so I can trust you to keep your word.
My right hand.
The other mother, holding it up, said the other mother, holding it up. She waggled the long finger slowly, displaying the claw-like nails.
I swear on that.
Coraline shrugged. Okay, she said. It's a deal. She ate the breakfast, trying not to wolf it down. She was hungrier than she had thought. As she ate, her other mother stared at her. It was hard to read expressions into those black button eyes, but Coraline thought that her other mother looked hungry too. She drank the orange juice, but even though she knew she would like it, she could not bring herself to taste the hot chocolate. Where should I start looking? Asked Coraline.
Where you wish,
said her other mother, as if she did not care at all. Coraline looked at her, and Coraline thought hard. There was no point, she decided, in exploring the garden. And the grounds, they didn't exist. They weren't real. There was no abandoned tennis court in the other mother's world, no bottomless well. All that was real was the house itself. They looked around the kitchen. She opened the oven, peered into the freezer, poked into the salad compartment of the fridge, and the other mother followed about, looking at Coraline with a smirk, always hovering at the edge of her lips. How big are souls anyway? Asked Coraline. The other mother sat down at the kitchen table and leaned back against the wall, saying nothing. She picked at her teeth with a long crimson varnished fingernail. Then she tapped the finger gently against the polished black surface of her black button eyes. So she's like doing this. Fine, said Coraline. Don't tell me. I don't care. It doesn't matter if you help me or not. Everyone knows that a soul is the same size as a beach ball. She was hoping the other brother would say something like, "Nonsense, they're the size of ripe onions, or suitcases, or grandfather clocks." But the other mother simply smiled, and the tapping of her fingernail against her eye was steady as relentless as the drip of water droplets from the faucet into the sink. And then Coraline realized it was simply the noise of the water, and she was alone in the room. Coraline shivered. She preferred the other mother to have a location. If she were nowhere, then she could be anywhere. And after all, it is easier to be afraid of something you cannot see. She put her hands into her pockets, and her fingers closed around the reassuring shape of the stone with the hole in it. She pulled it out of her pocket, held it in front of her as if she were holding a gun, and walked out into the hall. There was no sound but the tap, tap, tap of the water dripping into the metal sink. She glanced at the mirror at the end of the hall. For a moment it clouded, and it seemed to her the faces swarm in the glass, distant and shapeless, and then the faces were gone, and there was nothing in the mirror but a girl who was small for her age, holding something that glowed gently like a green coal. Coraline looked down at her hand, surprised. It was just a stone with a hole in it, a nondescript brown petal. Then she looked back into the mirror where the stone glimmered like an emerald. A trail of green fire blew from the pebble in the mirror and drifted toward Coraline's bedroom. Said Coraline. She walked into the bedroom. The toys fluttered excitedly as she walked in, as if they were pleased to see her, and a little tank rolled out of the toy box to greet her. Its tread rolled over several other toys. It fell from the toy box onto the floor, tripping as it fell, and it lay on the carpet like a beetle on its back, grumbling and grunting on its treads before Coraline picked it up and turned it over. The tank fled under the bed in embarrassment. Coraline looked around the room. She looked in the cupboards and the drawers. Then she picked up one end of the toy box and tipped all the toys in it out onto the carpet, where they grumbled and stretched. They wiggled awkwardly free of each other. A gray marble rolled across the floor and kicked against the wall. None of the toys looked particularly soul-like, she thought. She picked up and examined a silver charm bracelet from which hung tiny animal charms that chased each other around the perimeter of the bracelet, the fox never catching the rabbit, the bear never gaining on the fox. Coraline opened her hand and looked at the stone with the hole in it, hoping for a clue but not finding one. Most of the toys had been in the toy box had now crawled away to hide under the bed, and a few toys that were left, a green plastic soldier, a glass marble, and a vivid pink yo-yo and such, were the kinds of things you find in the bottoms of toy boxes in the real world. Forgotten objects, abandoned and unloved. She was about to leave and look elsewhere, and then she remembered a voice in the darkness, a gentle whispering voice, and what it had told her to do. She raised the stone with the hole in it and held it in front of her right eye. She closed her left eye and looked at the room through the hole in the stone. Through the stone, the world was gray and colorless, like a pencil drawing. Everything in it was gray. No, not quite everything. Something glinted on the floor, something the color of an ember in a nursery fireplace, the color of a scarlet and red tulip nodding in the May sun. Coraline reached out her left hand, scared that if she took her eye off it, it would vanish, and she fumbled for the burning thing. Her fingers closed about something smooth and cool. She snatched it, and then lowered the stone with a hole in it from her eye and looked down. The gray glass marble from the bottom of the toy box sat dully in the pink palm of her hand. She raised the stone to her eye once more and looked through it again. Once again the marble burned and flickered with a red fire. A voice whispered in her mind,
"Indeed, lady, it comes to me that I certainly was a boy. Now I do think on it. Oh, but you must hurry. There are 2 of us still to find, and Beldam is already angry with you for uncovering me."
If I'm going to do this, thought Coraline, I'm not going to do it in her clothes. She changed into her pajamas and her dressing gown and her slippers, leaving the gray sweater and the black jeans neatly folded on the bed, the orange boots on the floor by the toy box. She put the marble into her dressing gown pocket and walked outside into the hall. Something stung her face, and hands like sand blowing on a bench on a windy day. She covered her eyes and pushed forward. The sand stings got worse, and it got harder and harder to walk, as if she were pushing into the wind on a particularly blustery day, with a vicious wind and a cold one. She took a step backwards, the way she had come.
"Oh, keep on going. Oh, keep going," whispered a ghost voice in her ear, "for the bell dam is angry."
She stepped forward in the hallway into another gust of wind, which stung her cheeks and face with invisible sand, sharp as needles, sharp as glass. "Play fair!" shouted Coraline into the wind. There was no reply, but the wind whipped about her one more time, petulantly, and then it dropped away and was gone. As she passed the kitchen, Coraline could hear in the sudden silence the drip, drip of the water from the leaking tap, or perhaps the other mother's long fingernail tapping impatiently against the table. Coraline resisted the urge to look. In a couple of strides she reached the front door, and she walked outside. Coraline went down the steps and around the house until she reached the other Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's flat. The lamps around the door were flickering on and off almost randomly now, spelling out no words that Coraline could understand. The door was closed. She was afraid it was locked, and she pushed on it with all her strength. First it stuck, but then suddenly it gave, and with a jerk Coraline stumbled into the dark room beyond. Coraline closed one hand around the stone with the hole in it and walked forward into blackness. She expected to find a curtained anteroom, but there was nothing there. The room was dark. The theater was empty. She moved ahead cautiously. Something rustled above her. She looked up into a deeper darkness, and as she did so, her feet knocked against something. She reached down, picked up a flashlight, and clicked it on, sweeping the beam around the room. The theater was derelict and abandoned. Chairs were broken on the floor, and old, dusty spider webs draped the walls and hung from the rotten wood and the decomposing velvet hangings. Something rustled once again. Coraline directed her light beam upward toward the ceiling. There were things up there, hairless jellyfish. She thought they might once have had faces, might even once have been dogs, but no dogs had wings like bats or could hang like spiders, like bats upside down. The light startled the creatures, and one of them took to the air, its wings whirling heavily through the dust. Coraline ducked as it swooped close to her. It came to rest on a far wall, and it began to clamber outside down, back to the nest of the dog batons upon the ceiling. Coraline raised the stone to her eye, and she scanned the room through it, looking for something that glowed or glinted, a telltale sign that somewhere in this room was another hidden soul. She ran the beam of the flashlight about the room as she searched, the thick dust in the air making the sunbeam seem almost solid. There was something up on the back wall behind the ruined stage. It was grayish white, twice the size of Coraline herself, and it was stuck to the back wall like a slug. Coraline took a deep breath. "I'm not afraid," she told herself. "I'm not." She did not believe herself, but she scrambled onto the old stage, fingers sinking into the rotting wood as she pulled herself up. She got closer to the thing on the wall. She saw that it was some kind of sack, like a spider's egg case. It twitched in the light beam. Inside the sack was something that looked like a person. But a person with two heads, with twice as many arms and legs as it should have. The creature in the sack seemed horribly unformed and unfinished, as if two plasticine people had been warmed and rolled together, squashed and pressed into one thing. Coraline hesitated. She did not want to approach the thing. The dog bats dropped one by one from the ceiling and began to circle the room, coming close to her but never touching her. Perhaps there are no souls hidden in here, she thought. Perhaps I can just leave and go somewhere else. She took a last look through the hole in the stone. The abandoned theater was still a bleak gray, but now there was a brown glow, as rich and bright as polished cherry wood, coming from inside the sack. Whatever was glowing was being held in one of the hands of the thing on the wall. Coraline walked slowly across the damp stage, trying to make as little noise as she could, afraid that if she disturbed the thing in the sack, it would open its eyes and see her, and then... But there was nothing that she could think of as scary as having it look at her. Her heart pounded in her chest. She took another step forward. She had never been so scared, but still she walked forward until she reached the sack. Then she pushed her hand into the sticky, clinging wetness of the stuff on the wall. It crackled softly like a tiny fire as she pushed, and it clung to her skin and clothes like spiderweb clings, like white cotton candy. She pushed her hand into it and reached upward until she touched a cold hand, which was she could feel closed around another glass marble. The creature's skin felt slippery, as if it was covered in jelly. Coraline tugged at the marble. At first nothing happened. It was held tight in the creature's grasp. Then, one by one, the fingers closed their grip, and the marble slipped into her hand. The fingers loosened their grip, and the marble slipped into her hand. She pulled her arm back through the sticky webbing, relieved that the thing's eyes had not opened. She shone the light on its faces. They resembled, she decided, the younger versions of Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, but twisted and squeezed together like two lumps of wax that had melted and melded together into one ghastly thing. Without warning, one of the creature's hands made a grab for Coraline's arms. Its fingernails scraped her skin, but it was too slippery to grip, and Coraline pulled away successfully. Then the eyes opened, 4 black buttons glinting and staring down at her, and 2 voices that sounded like no voices that Coraline had ever heard began to speak to her. One of them wailed and whispered. The other buzzed like a fat and angry blue bottle at a window pane. But the voices said as one person, "Thief! Give it back! Stop! Thief!" The air became alive with dog bats. Coraline began to back away. Then she realized that terrifying though the thing on the wall that had once been the other Mrs. Spink and Forcible was, it was attached to the wall by its web, encased in a cocoon. It could not follow her. The dog bats flapped and fluttered about her, but they did nothing to hurt Coraline. She climbed down from the stage, shone the flashlight about the old theater, looking for the way out. "Flee, miss!" wailed a girl's voice in her head. "Flee now! You have 2 of us! Flee this place while your blood still flows!" Coraline dropped the marble into her pocket beside the other and spotted the door, ran to it, and pulled on it until it opened. Chapter 9. Outside, the world had become a formless, whirling mist with no shapes or shadows behind it. While the house itself seemed to have twisted and stretched, it seemed to Coraline that it was crouching and staring down at her, as if it were not really a house, but only the idea of a house. The person who had the idea, she was certain, was not a good person. There was a sticky web stuff clinging to her arm, and she wiped it off as best as she could. The gray windows of the house slanted at strange angles. The other mother was waiting for her, standing on the grass with her arms folded. Her black button eyes were expressionless, but her lips were pressed tightly together and in a cold fury. Then she saw Coraline. She reached out one long white hand, and she crooked her finger. Coraline walked toward her. The other mother said nothing. "I got 2, said Coraline. "1 soul still to go." The expression on the other mother's face did not change. She might not have heard what Coraline said. "Well, I just thought you'd want to know," said Coraline. "Thank you, Coraline," said the other mother coldly, and her voice did not just come from her mouth. It came from the mist, and the fog, and the house, and the sky. She said, "You know that I love you." Despite herself, Coraline nodded. It was true. The other mother loved her. But she loved Coraline as a miser loves money, or as a dragon loves its gold. In the other mother's button eyes, Coraline knew that she was a possession, nothing more, a tolerated pet whose behavior was no longer amusing. "I don't want your love," said Coraline. "I don't want anything from you. Not even a helping hand?" asked the other mother. "You have been doing so well after all. I thought you might want a little hint to help you with the rest of your treasure hunt." "I'm doing fine on my own," said Coraline. "Yes," said the other mother. "But if you wanted to get into the flat in the front, the empty one, to look around, you would find the door locked, and then where would you be?" "Oh." Coraline pondered this for a moment. Then she said, "Is there a key?" The other mother stood there in the paper gray fog. That's better. Kind of the flattening world. Her black hair drifted about her head as if it had a mind and a purpose all of its own. She coughed suddenly in the back of her throat and then she opened her mouth. The other mother reached up her hand and removed a small brass front door key from her tongue. "Here," she said. "You'll need this to get in." She tossed the key casually toward Coraline, who caught it one-handed. Before she could think about whether she wanted it or not, the key was slightly damp. The key was still slightly damp. The chill wind blew about them, and Coraline shivered and looked away. Then she looked back. She was alone. Uncertainly, she walked around to the front of the house and stood in front of the door to the empty flat. Like all the doors, it was painted bright green. "She does not mean you well," whispered a ghost voice in her ear. "We do not believe that she would help you. It must be a trick." Coraline said, "Yes, you're right, I expect." Then she put the key in the lock and turned it. Suddenly, the door swung open and silently Coraline walked in. The flat had walls the color of old milk. The wooden boards of the floor were uncarpeted and dusty with the marks and patterns of old carpets and rugs on them. There was no furniture in there, only places where furniture once had been. Nothing decorated the walls. There were discolored rectangles on the walls to show where paintings and photographs had once hung. It was so silent that Coraline imagined that she could hear the motes of dust drifting through the air. She found herself to be quite worried that something would jump out at her, so she began to whistle. She thought it might make it harder for things to jump out if she were whistling. First she walked through the empty kitchen. Then she walked through an empty bedroom, containing only a cast-iron bathroom. Then she walked through an empty bathroom, containing only a cast-iron bath, and in the bath a dead spider the size of a small cat. The last room she looked at had, she supposed, once been a bedroom. She could imagine that the rectangular dust shadow on the floorboards had once been a bed. Then she saw something and smiled grimly. Set into the floorboards was a large metal ring. Coraline knelt and took the cold ring in her hands.
and she tugged upwards as hard as she could. Terribly, slowly, stiffly, heavily, a hinged square of floor lifted. It was a trap door. It lifted, and through the opening Coraline could see only darkness. She reached down, and her hand found a cold switch. She flicked it without much hope that it would work. But somewhere below a bulb lit, and a thin yellow light came up from the hole in the floor. She could see steps heading down, but nothing else. Coraline put her hand into her pocket and took out the stone with the hole in it. She looked through it at the cellar, but saw nothing. She put the stone back in her pocket. Up through the hole came the smell of damp clay, and something else, an acrid tang like sour vinegar. Coraline let herself down into the hole, looking nervously at the trap door. It was so heavy that it felt she was sure she would be trapped down in the darkness forever. She put up a hand and touched it, but it stayed in position. And then she turned toward the darkness below, and she walked down the steps. Set into the wall at the bottom of the steps was another light switch, metal and rusting. She pushed it until it clicked down, and a naked bulb hanging from a wire from the low ceiling came on. It did not give up enough light even for Coraline to make out the things that had been painted onto the flaking cellar walls. The paintings seemed crude. There were eyes, she could see that, and things that might have been grapes, and other things seemed. Coraline could not be sure that they were paintings of people. There was a pile of rubbish in one corner of the room. Cardboard boxes filled with mildewed papers and decaying curtains in a heap beside them. Coraline's slippers crunched across the cement floor. The bad smell was worse now. She was ready to turn and leave when she saw the foot sticking out from beneath the pile of curtains. She took a deep breath. The smells of sour wine and moldy bread filled her head, and she pulled away from the damp cloth to reveal something more or less the shape of a person. In the dim light, it took her several seconds to recognize it for what it was. The thing was pale and swollen like a grub, with thin, stick-like arms and feet. It had almost no features on its face, which had puffed and swollen like raisin bread dough. The thing had 2 large black buttons where its eyes should have been. Coraline made no noise. Coraline made a noise. A sound of revulsion and horror. And as if it had heard her and awakened, the thing began to sit up. Coraline stood there, froze. The thing turned its head until both its black eyes were pointed straight at her. A mouth opened in the mouthless face, strands of pale stuff sticking to the lips, and a voice that no longer even faintly resembled her father whispered, "Coraline." "Well," said Coraline to the thing that had once been her other father, "at least you didn't jump out and scare me." The creature's twig-like hands removed to its face and pushed the pale clay about, making something like a nose. It said nothing. "I'm looking for my parents," said Coraline, "or a stolen soul from one of the other children. Are they down here?" "There is nothing down here," said the pale thing distinctly. "Nothing but dust and damp and forgetting." The thing was white and hung and swollen. Monstrous, thought Coraline, but so miserable. She raised the stone with the hole in it to her eye and looked through it. Nothing. The poor thing was telling the truth. "Poor thing," she said. "I bet she made you come down here as a punishment for telling me too much." The thing hesitated. Then it nodded. Coraline wondered how she could have ever imagined that this grub-like thing resembled her father. "I'm so sorry," she said. "She's not best pleased," said the thing that was once the other father. "Not best pleased at all. You've put her quite out of sorts. And then she gets out of sorts. And when she gets out of sorts, she takes it out on everybody else. It's her way." Coraline patted its hairless head. Its skin was tacky, like warm bread dough. "Poor thing," she said. "You're just a thing she made and then threw away." The thing nodded vigorously. As it nodded, the left button eye fell off and clattered onto the concrete floor. The thing looked around vacantly with its one eye, as if it had lost her. Finally it saw her, and as if making a great effort, it opened its mouth once more and said in a wet, urgent voice, "Run, child. Leave this place. She wants me to hurt you, to keep you here forever, so that you can never finish the game. And she will win. She is pushing me so hard to hurt you. I cannot fight her." "You can," said Coraline. "Be brave." She looked around. The thing that had once been the other father was between her and the steps and out of the cellar. She started edging along the wall, heading toward the steps. The thing twisted bonelessly until its one eye was again facing her. It seemed to be getting bigger now and more awake. "Alas," it said, "I cannot." It lunged across the cellar toward her. Then its toothless mouth opened wide. Coraline had a single heartbeat in which to react. She could only think of two things to do. Either she could scream and try to run away and be chased down a badly lit cellar by the huge grub thing, be chased until it caught her, or she could do something else. So she did something else. As the thing reached her, Coraline put out her hand and closed it around the thing's remaining button eye. And she tugged as hard as she knew how. For a moment nothing happened. The button came away and flew from her hand, clinging against the wall before it fell to the cellar floor. The thing froze in place. It threw its pale head back blindly. and opened its mouth horribly wide and roared in anger and frustration. Then, all in a rush, the thing swept toward the place where Coraline had been standing, but Coraline was not standing there any longer. She was already tiptoeing as quietly as she could up the steps that would take her away from the dim cellar with crude paintings on the walls. She could not take her eyes from the floor beneath her, though across which the pale thing flopped and withered, hunting for her. Then, as if it was being told what to do, the creature stopped moving, and its blind head tipped to one side. "It's listening for me," thought Coraline. "I must be extra quiet." She took another step up, and her foot slipped on the step, and the thing heard her. Its head tipped forward. For a moment it swayed and seemed to be gathering its wits. Then, fast as a serpent, it slithered for the steps and began to flow up them toward her. Coraline turned and ran wildly up the last half-dozen steps and pushed herself up and onto the floor of the dusty room. Without pausing, she pulled the heavy trapdoor toward her and let go of it. It crashed down with a thump just as something large banged against it. The trapdoor shook and rattled in the floor, but it stayed where it was. Coraline took a deep breath. If there had been any furniture in the flat, even a chair, it would have been pulled onto the trapdoor, but there was nothing. She walked out of the flat as fast as she could without actually ever running, and she locked the front door behind her. She left the key under the mat. Then she walked down onto the drive. She had half expected that the other mother would be standing there waiting for Coraline to come out, but the world was silent and empty. Coraline wanted to go home. She hugged herself and told herself that she was brave, and she almost believed herself, and then she walked around to the side of the house, in the gray mist that wasn't a mist, and she made for the stairs to go up. Chapter 10. Coraline walked up the stairs outside and building to the topmost flat where in her world the crazy old man upstairs lived. She had gone up there once with her real mother. When her mother was collecting for charity, they had stood in the open doorway waiting for the crazy old man with the mustache to find the envelope that Coraline's mother had left. And the flat had smelled of strange foods and ripe tobacco and odd, sharp, cheesy smelling things Coraline could not name. She had not wanted to go any further inside than that. "I'm an explorer," said Coraline out loud, but her words sounded muffled and dead on the misty air. She had made it out of the cellar, hadn't she? And she had, but if there was one thing that Coraline was certain of, it was that this flat would be worse. She reached the top of the house. The topmost flat had once been the attic of the house, but that was long ago. She knocked on the green painted door. It swung open, and she walked in. We have eyes, we have nerves, we have tails, we have teeth. We all get what you deserve. You'll all get what you deserves when we rise from underneath," whispered a dozen or more tiny voices in the dark flat. With the roof so low where it met the walls that Coraline could reach up and touch it, red eyes stared at her. Little pink feet scurried away as she came close. Darker shadows slipped through the shadows at the edges of things. It smelled worse, much worse in here than the real crazy old man upstairs flat. That smelled of food, unpleasant food, to Coraline's mind, but she knew that was a matter of taste. She did not like spices, herbs, or exotic things. This place smelled as if all the exotic foods in the world had been left to go rotten. "Little girl," said a rustling voice in the far room. "Yes?" said Coraline. "I'm not frightened," she told herself. And as she thought it, she knew that it was true. There was nothing here that frightened her. These things, even the thing in the cellar, were illusions. Things made by the other mother and a ghastly parody of the real people and real things on the other end of the corridor. She could not truly make anything, decided Coraline. She could only twist and copy and distort things that already existed. And then Coraline found herself wondering why the other mother would have placed a snow globe on the drawing room mantelpiece. For the mantelpiece in Coraline's world was quite bare. As soon as she asked herself the question, she realized that there was actually an answer. Then the voice came again, and her train of thought was interrupted. "Come here, little girl. I know what you want, little girl." Excuse me. It was a rustling voice, scratchy and dry. It made Coraline think of some kind of enormous dead insect, which was silly, she knew. How could a dead thing, especially a dead insect, have a voice? She walked through several rooms with low slanting ceilings until she came to the final room. It was a bedroom, and the other crazy old man upstairs sat at the far end of the room, in near darkness, bundled up in his coat and hat. As Coraline entered, he began to talk. "Nothing's changed, little girl," he said, his voice sounding like the noise dry leaves make as they rustle across the pavement. "And what if you do everything you swore you would? What then? Nothing's changed. You'll go home. You'll be bored. You'll be ignored. No one will listen to you. Not really listen to you. You're too clever and too quiet for them to understand. They don't even get your name right. Stay here with us," said the voice from the figure at the end of the room. "We will listen to you and play with you and laugh with you. Our other mother will build whole worlds for you to explore and tear them down every night when you are done. Every day will be better and brighter than the one that went before it. Remember the toy box. How much better would a world be built just like that, and all for you? And will there be gray, wet days where I just don't know what to do and there's nothing to read or to watch and nowhere to go and the days drag on forever?" asked Coraline. From the shadows, the man said, "Never." "And will there be awful meals with food made from recipes with garlic and tarragon and broad beans in?" asked Coraline.
Every meal will be a thing of joy, whispered the voice from under the old man's hat. Nothing will pass your lips that does not entirely delight you. And could I have day-glow green gloves to wear and yellow Wellington boots in the shapes of frogs? Asked Coraline. Frogs, ducks, rhinos, octopus, whatever you desire. The world will be built new for you every morning. If you stay here, you can have whatever you want. Coraline sighed. You don't really understand, do you? She said. I don't want whatever I want. Nobody does. Not really. What kind of fun would it be if I just got everything I ever wanted, just like that, and it didn't mean anything? What then? I don't understand, said the whispery voice. Of course you don't understand, she said, raising the stone with the hole in it to her eye. You're just a bad copy she made of the crazy old man upstairs. Not even that anymore, said the dead, whispery voice. There was a glow coming from the raincoat of the man at about his chest. Through the hole in the stone, the glow twinkled and shone blue-white as any star. She wished she had a stick or something to poke him with. She had no wish to get any closer to the shadowy man at the end of the room. Coraline took a step closer to the man, and he fell apart. Black rats leapt from the sleeves and from under the coat and hat. A score or more of them, red eyes shining in the dark. They chittered as they fled. The coat fluttered and fell heavily to the floor. The hat rolled into one corner of the room. Coraline reached out. One hand and pulled the coat open. It was empty, although it was greasy to the touch, and there was no sign of the final glass marble in it. She scanned the room, squinting through the hole in the stone, and caught sight of something that twinkled and burned like a star at the floor level by the doorway. It was being carried in 4 paws by the largest black rat. As she looked, it slipped away. The other rats watched her from the corners of the rooms as she ran after it. Now, rats can run faster than people, especially over short distances, but a large black rat holding a marble in its front paws is no match for a determined girl, even if she is small for her age. Moving at a run, smaller black rats ran back and forth across her path, trying to distract her, but she ignored them all, keeping her eyes fixed on one with the marble, who was heading straight out of the flat toward the front door. They reached the steps onto the outside of the building. Coraline had time to observe that the house itself was continuing to change, becoming less distinct and flattening out even as she raced down the stairs. It reminded her of a photograph of a house, now not the thing itself. Then she was simply racing pell-mell down the steps in pursuit of the rat, with no room in her mind for anything else. Certain she was gaining on it. She was running fast, too fast.
she discovered as she came to the bottom of one flight of stairs. Her foot skidded and twisted, and she went crashing into the concrete landing. Ow. Her left knee was scraped and skinned. In the palm of one hand she had thrown out to stop herself was a mess of scraped skin and grit. It hurt a little, and it would, she knew, soon hurt much more. She picked the grit out of her palm and climbed to her feet, and as fast as she could, knowing that she had lost it, and it was already too late, she went down to the final landing at the ground level. She looked around for the rat, but it was gone, and the marble with it. Her hand stung where the skin had been scraped, and there was blood trickling down her ripped pajama leg from her knee. It was as bad as the summer that her mother had taken the training wheels off of Coraline's bicycle. But then, back then, in with all the cuts and scrapes, her knees had scabs on tops of scabs. She had had a feeling of achievement. She was learning something, doing something she had not known how to do. Now she felt nothing but cold loss. She had failed the ghost children. She had failed her parents. She had failed herself. Failed everything. She closed her eyes and wished that the earth would swallow her up. There was a cough. She opened her eyes and saw the rat. It was lying on the brick path at the bottom of the stairs with a surprised look on its face, which was now several inches away from the rest of it. Its whiskers were stiff. Its eyes were open, its yellow teeth visible and yellow and sharp. A collar of wet blood glistened at its neck. Besides the decapitated rat, a smug expression on its face, was the black cat. It rested one paw on the gray glass marble. "I think once I mentioned," said the cat, "that I don't like rats at the best of times. It looked like you needed this one, however. I hope you don't mind my getting involved." "I think," said Coraline, trying to catch her breath, "I think you may have said something of the sort." The cat lifted its paw from the marble, which rolled toward Caroline. She picked it up. In her mind, a final voice whispered to her urgently, "She has lied to you. She will never give you up. Now she has you. She will no more give any of us up than change her nature." The hairs on the back of Coraline's neck prickled, and Coraline knew that the girl's voice told the truth. She put the marble in her dressing gown pocket with the others. She had all 3 marbles now. All she had to do was find her parents. And Coraline realized with a surprise that bit was easy. She knew exactly where her parents were. If she had stopped to think, she might have known where they were all along. The other mother could not create. She could only transform and twist and change. The mantelpiece in the drawing room back home was quite empty. But knowing that, she knew something else as well. The other mother. She has plans to break her promise. "She won't let us go," said Coraline. "I wouldn't put it past her," admitted the cat. "Like I said, there's no guarantee she'll play fair." And then he raised his head. "Hello. Did you see that?" "What?" "Look behind you," said the cat. The house had flattened out even more. It no longer looked like a photograph, more like a drawing, a crude charcoal scribble of a house. drawn on gray paper. "Whatever's happening?" said Coraline. "Thank you for helping with the rat. I suppose I'm almost there, aren't I? So you go off into the mist or wherever you go, and I hope I'll get to see you at home, if she lets me go home." The cat's fur was on end, and its tail was bristling like a chimney sweep brush. "What's wrong?" asked Coraline. "They've gone," said the cat. "They aren't there anymore. The ways in and out of this place. The ways in and out of this place. They just went flat." "Is that bad?" The cat lowered its tail, swishing it from side to side angrily. It made a low growling noise in the back of its throat. It walked in a circle until it was facing away from Coraline, and then it began to walk backwards stiffly, one at a time, until it was pushing up against Coraline's leg. She put down a hand to stroke it. Egg could feel how hard its heart was beating. It was trembling like a dead leaf in a storm. "You'll be fine," said Coraline. "Everything's going to be fine. I'll take you home." The cat said nothing. "Come on, cat," said Coraline. She took a step back towards the steps, but the cat stayed where it was, looking miserable and oddly much smaller. "If the only way out is past her," said Coraline, "then that's the way we're going to go." She went back to the cat, bent down and picked it up. The cat did not resist. It trembled slightly. She supported its bottom with one hand, rested its front legs on her shoulders. The cat was heavy, but not too heavy to carry. It looked at the palm of her hand, where the blood from the scrape was welling up. Coraline walked up the stairs one at a time, heading back to her own flat. She was aware of the marbles clicking in her pocket, aware of the stone with the hole in it, aware of the cat pressing itself against her. She got to her front door, now just a small child's scrawl of a door, and she pushed her hand against it, half expecting that her hand would rip through it, revealing nothing behind it but blackness and a scattering of stars. But the door swung open and Coraline went through it. I'm going to stop for here.